Hello everyone. It is 12:15. It's time to get started. I'm so glad that you've joined us, and I'd like to welcome you to Vitiello Communications Group Best Practices Roundtable webinar. So glad that you're here. Today's topic is all about allyship programs. My name is Jill Vitiello, and I'm the CEO of Vitiello Communications Group. We are an agency focused on the employee experience, and we have expertise in change management, employee engagement, and inclusive workplace culture. Today, we're using the Zoom webinar format rather than the Zoom meeting. So we'll have a mix of presentation and interaction. We'll be using polling throughout our time together. And I encourage you to participate in the polling and let your voice be heard. Also, we'll have some time to pause for questions, and certainly feel free to use the chat function and to use the Q&A function as well. So as I said, we will open up for discussion a little bit later when we're through a part of the material that we're going to present to you. Seth, if you would advance to the next slide, thank you so much. This is our fourth quarterly roundtable in our series this year. We've covered crisis communication, safe workplace reentry. We've also talked about recent impacts on corporate culture. And I'd like you to please be aware that we are recording the webinar, and we do plan to post it to our website so that we can share our views broadly. We are going to launch our first poll right now and just get a sense of who is here on the call. So Seth, if you would launch that, thank you so much. So I'm going to ask, how would you describe your role in your organization? Are you a business leader and a manager or a manager? A business owner? Are you a communication professional? Human resource professional, or is your title something else? That would be other. Just take a moment. And I see a number of you coming in too. So if you're just joining us, just take a moment and let us know that you're here and who you are, how you would describe your role. Okay, Seth, thank you so much. If you could show us. Very good. So we've got business leaders and managers, communications professionals. For the most part, that is who is here. Thank you so much. We're so glad that everyone is here. Glad to have voices present. Seth, if you could just go on to the next slide for us. I just want to take a moment to introduce Vitiello Communications Group for people who may not know us. We are focused on, as I said earlier, change management, employee engagement, and inclusive workplace culture. We provide communication strategy and content development to large global organizations, as well as to privately held mid-market firms. We're passionate about learning and innovation. Within our agency, we have a program called Vitiello Learns. And that is our monthly opportunity for team members to present best practices to one another to enhance our learning and growth. But we like to bring that to our business community as well. So every quarter, we do offer these webinars, and we use them as an opportunity to get people talking, to share best practices, and for people to ask questions in a safe and nurturing environment. And that's what we're hoping to create in our next few moments together. So we are taking a look at the topics that we'll be working on for 2021. And Seth, if you would just launch our next poll, I'm going to ask for attendees' help in choosing which of these topics is the one that you think would provide most value to you. Let's just take a moment. Of course, they're all important. But we would like to get a sense of what you'd like to hear first as we approach the new year. So those topics are change management, diversity, equity, and inclusion, employee experience, inclusive workplace culture, and remote workforce engagement. Just take a moment now and choose the one that would have the most value to you right now. And I do see some more folks joining. Yes, thank you. Thanks. So it looks like we have a tie between the employee experience and remote workforce engagement. Thank you so much for sharing this. And as we move forward, I hope we have a conversation where we can explore the importance of these in light of our current topic and anything else that you'd like to bring up in our discussion today. So thank you for taking that poll. Appreciate it. I am absolutely delighted to have the opportunity to introduce our webinar speaker, Richelle Feigin, Ph.D. Richelle is a senior account executive at Vitiello Communications Group, and she leads our inclusive workplace culture practice area. Earlier this year, Richelle earned the SHRM Inclusive Workplace Culture Specialty Credential. And on top of that, she's got years of experience in leading our corporate social responsibility practice area, as well as our employee well-being practice area. I'm also proud to tell you that Richelle is the winner of the Vitiello Cares Employee Volunteer of the Year. She logged more than 100 volunteer hours in 2020. In the midst of pandemic, Richelle did not let that stop her. She is just a passionate volunteer, and she found a way to do virtual volunteering. She uncovered an organization called Learning Ally, and she trained to work with them as a volunteer. And it's helping young people develop their skills as readers. Thank you so much for your incredible service to the community. And thank you for your leadership in our key practice areas and for being here today to share your knowledge with us. Richelle Feigin.
Thanks, Jill. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about an issue that has become more and more prevalent over the last several months. When I initially signed up for my certification in inclusive workplace culture, I had no idea that we would be in a position today where there's been this convergence of major global events that has accelerated the pace that businesses want to engage in real transformational cultural change. So it's a timely and important topic, but it's also one that I'm extremely passionate about. Today, we plan to cover three things. First, the value of an inclusive workplace culture, explaining what it means to be an ally, and then exploring how to create an allyship program. And as we go through the session today, I encourage you to think about what you are learning from two perspectives. First, as an individual, how can we be more inclusive and become allies in our own organizations? And then secondly, as a leader in our organization, how can we promote allyship? And what can we do to start or sustain an allyship program in our own company? So let's start with inclusive workplace culture. What is it? An organization with a truly inclusive workplace culture needs to have three different components. First, it has to have a diverse workforce. And unfortunately, this has been the one and only focus for a lot of companies. However, there are two more pieces to the puzzle if you truly want to be inclusive. The second is having structures and processes in place that support inclusion. And then finally, the behaviors of leaders, managers, and employees have to reflect the inclusiveness as a value. So you may be asking, why does this matter so much? If we have a diverse workforce, isn't that enough? And the answer really is no. According to the Society of Human Resources Management, companies who achieve an inclusive workplace culture are 2 times as likely to meet or exceed financial targets, 3 times as likely to be high performing, 6 times as likely to be innovative and agile, and 8 times as likely to achieve better business outcomes. And most importantly, inclusive workplace organizations have happier employees who are more productive and stay with the company longer. Now, SHRM says that only about 12% of organizations today have actually reached that level of inclusivity, but employees really want it. So the question is, what do we do? There's so many ways to work toward better inclusion and diversity, but our focus today is going to be specifically on allyship programs. So let's start with some definitions, because allies and allyship might be a new concept for some of you. Allies are people who actively promote and aspire to advance inclusive culture through intentional, positive, and conscious efforts that benefit people as a whole. Then allyship is the process, right? So that's the process of building relationships that are based on trust and consistency and accountability for marginalized individuals or groups of colleagues in your organization. It's a unique opportunity for employees to grow and learn about themselves while building confidence in others. And then a company-supported allyship program encourages and empowers the workforce to help identify and address non-inclusive activities. And we'll get into more about how that works in just a minute. Seth, I think we're ready for our first poll as part of this process. So we just wanted to take a minute to find out where your organization is in its allyship journey. So there's several different choices here, different levels. So the first one is I'm not sure, and that's perfectly fine. The second one is this is the first time I'm hearing about allyship, also perfectly fine. We're glad you're here. I've heard of allyship within my company, but I don't know if there's a formal program. We have a diversity and inclusion program, but not a formal allyship program. We have a corporate allyship program, or yes, we have a corporate allyship program and I participate in it. So if you could just take a minute and answer that poll, it'll give us a good sense of where you all are with allyship. Great. So it looks like the majority of you have a diversity inclusion program of some sort, but maybe not a formal allyship program. So that's great. That's where a lot of companies are. I would say that's pretty standard. Some of you have heard of allyship, and some of you say this is the first time hearing about allyship. And like I said, that's perfectly fine. We're glad you're here and happy to help share that information today. All right, so let's take a look at what allies actually do. Inclusion isn't necessarily natural for people. I mean, you tend to gravitate toward people who are similar or like-minded. So allies' job is to work to fix that imbalance in the workplace in small ways. So you may have heard the word privilege being thrown around a lot lately. Privilege is a special advantage or entitlement that is automatically granted to some. So an allyship program actually to use that privilege and advocate for others. I would highly suggest searching YouTube for a video called Privilege Exercise. It's a very powerful, eye-opening way to better understand privilege. We didn't want to take the time today to go through that and take that time, but I would really encourage you to look at it at a later date. Allies aren't afraid of the word privilege, and they don't think it's a bad thing. Instead, they acknowledge the privilege they have, and they talk about it openly. I mean, the fact that I was born in the United States to two people who had a college education, that's privilege. It's not anybody's fault. It's not within our control, but it is up to me to use that privilege to help others that may not be as fortunate. Allies are good listeners who work to better understand. They don't always feel the need to offer their own opinions, but instead support the opinions or ideas of others. They demonstrate that they're open to learning. They speak in a direct, thoughtful manner, and they're seen as trustworthy. Allies spend time educating themselves on issues that marginalized groups face. It's not that they can't ask questions, but it's better if they've done their homework first to show that they care. They admit mistakes and apologize for them and promise to do better next time. I don't pretend to be perfect, and I certainly make mistakes. I recently found out that using the phrase being grandfathered in can be seen as offensive. And it turns out its origin has to do with keeping African Americans out of polling stations in the 1890s. I had no idea. But I apologized to the person that was upset about it, and I've made a mental note not to use that term anymore. Getting back to our list, allies seek to understand and embrace the complex emotions that go along with being part of a marginalized population. They put others first, and they don't become an ally to be recognized or rewarded. They do it because it's the right thing to do. So we've talked a little bit about the idea behind an ally and what they're trying to achieve, but it's important to think about what allies can do from a practical standpoint to make a difference. There are several roles that allies can play in helping an organization become more inclusive. So here are just a few. Sponsors speak out to show support for an underrepresented group or person. Champions go one step further and they speak out in a public setting. Amplifiers ensure that all voices are heard, so they take the message and repeat it or emphasize it. Sometimes that can occur in a meeting. If someone says something and the meeting moves on, sometimes the amplifier will go repeat that message and make sure that message is acknowledged. An advocate uses their own influence to bring peers into their circles. So maybe they invite them to be part of a board of directors, or when they're developing cross-functional teams, but it's basically offering opportunities to people who may not have been included in that in the past. Scholars spend a lot of time researching to understand the challenges and prejudices that are out there. An upstander, which is not a bystander, points out comments that could be offensive, like microaggressions or unconscious bias that occurs in the workplace. And confidants are allies who listen and give marginalized folks a safe place to talk about not only their fears and their frustrations, but also what they need in the workplace. More and more companies are setting up formal allyship programs, or at least educating their employees about the importance of being an ally in a more informal setting. The benefits of starting a corporate allyship program include, as I mentioned before, identifying those non-inclusive issues right as they happen. So microaggressions during meetings, unconscious bias among team members, things like that. And it empowers individuals so they feel like it's okay to speak up. And there's an acknowledgement on the company's behalf that, hey, you know what, we can do better. And with that, it takes it from a personal issue where someone feels like a victim to something that the company admits is something that they're working on. It's a bigger issue than just one person. So you may be wondering, how on earth do we set up an allyship program? Our recommendation would be to start with a diversity and inclusion audit or assessment. So first, determining what areas of D&I need improvement through a review of HR materials around recruiting, hiring, promoting, and retaining employees from various diversity groups. You can survey the employee base and get their input and feedback on D&I within the company to get a good baseline for where things are right now. And then go back to those three components of inclusive workplace culture and determine if you have a diverse workforce, if you have the inclusive structures and processes in place, and then the leadership and employee behaviors that demonstrate that inclusion is valuable. Then once you have that baseline to start from, you can set some D&I goals and objectives that you can aspire to. Next, you have to determine what resources are available. So whether it's an internal team, partners within the organization that you can work with, HR, D&I groups, communications, consultants, and then if there's a budget that's available to use. And if there's not enough, that's the time to build a business case to recruit and support and increase those resources. The next step would be to develop a communications plan that will take you through the entire life cycle of the program, from planning to launch to ongoing maintenance and then continuous improvement of the program. Then we have training. So before you can get people excited and motivated to want to participate in an allyship program, there needs to be some understanding of what allyship is and why it's important. Then there's the official launch, and this can take many forms. It could be an executive town hall meeting, a video, a virtual event, especially during this time, just to name a few. And then finally, there's the ongoing support of the program to keep it alive. So continuously raising the bar, adjusting the goals, and maintaining the drive and motivation to keep the program on track. This could include selecting participants to lead and organize or serve on panels, sharing successes. I mean, a great way to inspire the workforce to share results is to share results and communicate that impact of the program is having on groups and individuals alike. And then don't forget to re-strategize if necessary. If you come to a key milestone and things aren't going as planned, take that opportunity to recalibrate, check in with leadership, ensure they're being public allies, and then change course as needed. So what's next? Well, we said we would cover 3 things today: explaining inclusive workplace culture, discussing what it means to be an ally, and reviewing the fundamentals of building an allyship program. And I think we've done that. We didn't want to spend too much time because we do want to get to the discussion, but hopefully we've been able to give you a good overview of those 3 things. But you may be wondering what you can do to put what you've learned today into action. So personally, I'd like to invite you to take the Inclusive Workplace Culture 10-day challenge with us starting tomorrow. This challenge provides you with specific action items you can take each day for 10 days to show your commitment to an inclusive workplace culture and to take your first step toward becoming an ally. For your team, I'd suggest to start by opening your eyes and ears. Commit to being more aware of unconscious bias and micro inequities, being willing to speak up. And you can review those ally roles and figure out which ones you can commit to. You can share what you've learned with teammates. I mean, a big part of this is about educating others and being willing to speak up. And then for your organization as a whole, really depends on your role, but I encourage you to become an investigator and an influencer. You can investigate company practices regarding inclusion and diversity. You can find out if your employer has an allyship program. You can research what training already exists, and then use your influence and your new knowledge to help others in key roles understand the importance of inclusive workplace culture overall and allyship specifically. This slide gives you a quick snapshot excuse me, of the 10-day challenge that I mentioned. As an attendee of this roundtable, you'll be receiving an email daily for 10 days starting tomorrow that will give you a specific action item to take each day to start your allyship journey. So I encourage you to participate, and we'd love to hear feedback from each of you about how the challenge goes and how people react to these new behaviors. So with that, we'd like to open up the floor for a discussion. Jill, I don't know if any questions have come up in the chat.
I'm looking in the Q&A section. There are no questions there. And looking in the chat, also no questions or comments there. I would say now is a good time for folks to use the chat or the Q&A if they'd like to pose any questions or just comment. Or I think we have the opportunity to do a hand raise, and we can certainly call on individuals and make sure that their voices are heard. While people are thinking about the questions that they'd like to ask or best practices they'd like to share, I would like to just ask you to clarify one term that you used, Richelle. You used the word microaggressions, and I know that's appeared in the press recently. Can you just clarify what that means?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of different words that have been going around that are all related. So there's unconscious bias, there's microaggressions, there's micro inequities. Microaggressions are really usually little comments that people make that they think are harmless in a meeting or passing someone in the hallway, but that really can have a dig at someone personally. So I'm trying to think of an example, but for example, I've heard someone say that when they finally meet someone in person, maybe they say, "Oh gosh, when I heard you on the phone, you didn't sound Black." So that can be very offensive to people, and the person saying it doesn't mean it necessarily as something offensive, but it can be taken that way. So it's just pointing that out, and again, having that person, make an apology, say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about what I was saying. That really isn't appropriate. I promise I won't do that again."
So the point is, you acknowledge that what you've done is unintentionally hurtful, apologize for it, and then try to learn from it as well.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In the chat, Richelle, there's a couple of comments. Great review. Will you share the deck with attendees? And
that I don't know the answer to, Jill, so I'll leave that one to you.
The answer is yes. It'll be posted to our website, as will the recording, so that people can listen again or share this learning with others in their organizations. And another comment in the chat is, can you repeat the YouTube video that you suggested that we view?
Oh, sure. If you just go into the search for YouTube and type in privilege exercise, you should be able to see it. It's a really powerful exercise. I mean, I can give you a brief overview of what it's about, but basically we've done this
Sure.
with some of our clients to help open some eyes around privilege. So everybody, and this is, I haven't done it virtually yet. I've only done it in person. So we'll have to rethink the format eventually, but basically people stand in a line across the room, and a series of questions are asked. Something that might be, my parents have a college education, or I'm able to buy hair products in my local store that best suit me, or various questions like that. And so as you listen to the questions, you take a step forward if you agree with the question, and you take a step back if your answer is no. And it's a series of about 20 different questions. And then at the end of the session, it's very uncomfortable. I'll be very honest. It's very comfortable to be, especially one of the people who's very far forward in the room versus someone who's very far back in the room, and to see the discrepancy even among people that you work with around, privilege and what that looks like. But it's also very eye-opening because, like I said, that gives the people, especially in the front of the room, it's up to them then to use that privilege to help the people who are in the back of the room in some way, shape, or form as an ally.
I've watched that video several times, and it is truly a powerful experience, even not even being in the room, but watching how people respond to one another going through the exercise. Thank you for sharing that. And what we'll do, Seth, we'll ask you to post the link to that YouTube video when you put the webinar recording on our website as well. So it'll make it easy for people to find that. We have some questions that have come in. One says, what's a good way to start a conversation about an inclusive workplace culture when you don't notice any particular issues?
Well, I think it's going to depend on your role, but I would definitely go back to that review of what exists in the organization now. So, you may not notice any issues, but how are people feeling? I mean, a good way to do that would be to survey the employees, like I said, and have kind of a baseline around, do they feel like they're included? Do they feel like they have, that they can bring their true selves to work every day? So I think a discussion around how employees overall are feeling. I don't know if your organization has employee resource groups, but those are often a good place to start to find out what issues those marginalized groups particularly face that we may be able to work on from an organizational standpoint. But I would start with some employee surveys. I know one of our clients did a recent allyship webinar and then did a survey afterwards. So they did a bit of education and then did a survey afterwards to find out how people felt. So sort of getting that baseline around, do we have all the right pieces that we need, and are we headed in the right direction, or do we have a lot of work to do?
Thank you for that answer. Annette has raised a hand. This is Annette Harris. She's raised her hand and would like to ask a question. I'm looking in the Q&A right now to see if your question is posted there, Annette, or if you'd like to ask it live. And Seth, I don't know if you can unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Annette.
I just want to first of all say thank you. A great presentation. This was just excellent. It reminded me, I used to do a lot of diversity work in the 90s, and this is just where we need to be at right now. So I just want to tell you how excited I am, Richelle, as I was listening to your presentation. I was just really just blown away to see the progress that we're making as a nation and as corporate America to begin forming these allyships. And I want to say this has been very informative for me as well, because I've heard the word really allyship thrown around, but really didn't know what it meant. So you've done an excellent job helping to educate me about it. And I truly appreciate that. I think my question is, and I want to also apologize for being a little late. I thought this meeting started, it landed on my calendar, I thought at 11:30. So I thought I was early when I logged in at 11:22.
That's okay, Annette.
And I was just, so I missed something. I don't know what I missed, but I'm happy to hear you're sharing the slides with us so I can get that. So my question is, are there, I want really certainly to be involved in more of this, because one of the projects that I'm working on now is racial reconciliation and healing and equality between law enforcement officers in the Black community as a consequence of a lot of the civil unrest that we've had in the country for the last 4 months. And I am looking for allyships. So my question is, do you have a list of organizations who are engaged in this work?
Sure. I guess I want to make sure I understand your question. Are you asking for organizations that, examples of allyship programs within organizations, or are you asking about consultants that could come help you create an allyship program?
Well, I actually am able to create my own, since I do have diversity and inclusion program already in our policy. And but what I want to do is partner with organizations externally who are engaged in this work, who might be able to support us in the work that we're doing right now in a nonprofit organization, if that makes sense.
Sure. I mean, obviously, Vitiello helps with the communications piece of things. So if you're looking to take your allyship program and have it be enhanced, by a communications organization, we certainly would be willing to help you with that. There are several, we have some links and stuff. I don't know if you're going to share out some of these resources afterwards as well. But we have several links that we can share with you, articles from the Harvard Business Review and Forbes, et cetera. There are some organizations out there who are doing a good job of allyship. I think Accenture, Bank of America, Mercedes-Benz. If you wanted to try to link up with some folks from those organizations to share best practices, I know a lot of organizations are willing to do that. Okay. As far as the D&I perspective, if you're looking for consultants in that area, we could certainly provide you with some names and resources.
I think you answered my question. I'm actually a cultural broker myself, so I provide consulting in this space.
Okay, good.
But you've answered my question as far as the organizations. Accenture, I know you mentioned Bank of America. And what was the third one? I'm sorry.
Mercedes-Benz and I believe Rockwell Automation were all mentioned in a recent article.
Perfect.
Yes, and Seth, I will ask you to include those links to the articles that we have uncovered. Annette, thank you so much for your question. There's another question in the Q&A from Michael. What would you advise global companies with subsidiaries in countries where homosexuality and female rights are less advanced?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, you always have to take into account whatever the local, cultural issues are, or, what the level of inclusivity and diversity is in those particular countries. But I know that we've had a lot of success in this type of thing with having almost an ambassador program or a champion program, and having people from those different countries participate in a consulting type group for diversity and inclusion. So including someone from each of the countries that you're trying to work through to make sure that they have firsthand knowledge of what's going on in that country and can provide cultural context around, what's acceptable, what levels they're at, what things seem to be more of an issue or less. But coming together on a regular basis with people from those different countries and having them be the expert for each group is very helpful. And then, again, adjusting or adapting your program or plan based on what you learn from each country.
Thank you for that answer, Richelle. I'm just going to pause for a moment and make sure that Michael feels that his question was answered adequately and see if there's a best practice that someone would be willing to share. And there is another question in the chat that we'll get to in just a moment. Is there a best practice that someone would like to bring up, or a question, a follow on? Okay, I'm going to go back to our chat. One question came in from Anne. Why were people feeling bad about having privilege? And should we be ashamed about being privileged?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people feel, especially in today's culture, that, oh, I have this privilege, and, and they feel guilty. But as I said during the presentation, I mean, there's nothing wrong with having privilege. It's acknowledging it and then using it to help those who maybe don't. So, I think, Anne, I think you were the one that said you came in a little bit late, but one of the examples I gave was, I was born in the United States. I was born to two parents who had a college education. That's nothing I could control. It's not my fault. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's a great thing. But if, I'm not using that privilege to then help other marginalized groups, then that's on me. So I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. I don't think it's anything to feel guilty about, but unfortunately, a lot of people do. Instead, I think it's taking that privilege and being able to use your influence to help others.
Thank you for that answer. Richelle, another question also in the chat, a question to repeat the definition of microaggression, but then the follow-on is, what is micro inequity? And can you give an example of that?
Well, so going back to microaggression, it's really something that somebody says or does in the workplace, whether it's in a meeting or in passing in the hallway, that maybe isn't intended to be hurtful or offensive, but the person takes it that way, or they haven't realized it. So the example I gave was, you finally meet somebody in person and you say, "Oh gosh, when I talked to you on the phone, you certainly didn't sound Black," and that the person saying it didn't mean it to be offensive. They just said it without thinking, and the person hearing it was offended. And so I think we were talking about just owning that and saying, gosh, I didn't think about that when I said it. I really didn't mean to be offensive. I'm really sorry. And then, learning from it and agreeing not to do it again. Micro inequity just means basically, it's small micro, right? And then inequity meaning unequal. So it's things that happen in meetings or again in the workplace where people aren't truly being seen as equal. So maybe someone has the leader of a meeting calls on certain people more often to speak rather than others. Or as I said before, someone says something and their message kind of gets passed over, and then somebody else says the exact same thing 5 minutes later, and that person is, cheered on. And, oh, that's a great idea. Thanks so much for sharing it, when the person prior had already said it, but it kind of got passed over. So there's micro inequities that happen where people aren't really being treated as equal, even though it's not necessarily intentional. And then there's microaggressions where you may say something or do something or take an action that upsets someone, again, even if it may not be completely intentional.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Richelle, another question came in referring to the example that you gave about the term grandfathered being an offensive term. And the question is, how can you learn about these terms before you use them? So how do we educate ourselves that we are just clueless about and have no idea would be offensive to others?
Yeah, I do a lot of reading, a lot of articles, and try to find out, more. It's part of that research, right, that you do to try to understand the challenges and the issues that some of the marginalized groups may face. So a lot of reading, a lot of, podcasts and videos. One of my very favorite things that I've really been focused on has been the Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man with Emmanuel Acho. Those are fantastic. So I would just encourage you to, open up your Google and start searching for different things, put in some of those search terms around microaggressions and micro inequalities and unconscious bias. And I think you'll find there's so much out there right now. You can't possibly learn it all, obviously. And like I said, there's going to be times that you're going to make mistakes. I had no idea that grandfathered was a bad thing. I've used it my whole life. It just means that, you're grandfathered in, you don't have to worry about, whatever the new rule is, but I had no idea where it came from or what the history of it was. So once it was pointed out, now I know. So again, acknowledging it, learning from it, moving on, and then just really spending some time, reading and learning and being, active in those communities and with, those podcasts and video series and things like that.
Thank you. I'm going to pause here and just ask if there's anyone who would like to share a best practice or ask a question live. And we have prepared one example of an allyship teachable moment that I would like to share before we are almost done with our time today. So I'd like to give others a chance to raise a question. Okay, I don't see any new ones coming in the Q&A or the chat. I wanted to bring this example up. Richelle, I hope you don't mind if I talk a little bit about this, but this,
Absolutely.
This is an email that came into my inbox that was so powerful and moving that I asked permission from Dr. Charlotte Jones Burton to share this in today's webinar. And here you'll note that if you just glance through this email from Dr. Charlotte and Dr. Kemi, this is from an organization called the Women of Color in Pharma. I have the great privilege to serve on the advisory council to WOSIP, and just am so overwhelmed with how this movement that the women have identified and have put their energy toward is so essential and so important to us right now. This email that came in from Charlotte was not only to people in the WOSIP community, but is posted on their website as well. And it is a wonderful teachable moment in allyship. In fact, Dr. Charlotte even notes that in the email because she saw that as we're so excited about Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. She's, of course, in the news all the time. She's being referred to in certain ways. And what this email points out is that there was an omission of referring to Kamala Harris as a Black woman. And with clarity and sensitivity, WOSIP points out what we can do as allies to make sure that this doesn't happen, that identity that's so critical to a person who is going to be one of the highest leaders in our land, that needs to be acknowledged and it needs to be referenced correctly. And I was just very, very thankful for WOSIP presenting us with this information and putting in a context that made it immediately relatable to me and to anyone who's interested in being an ally for any group, especially for women of color in pharma. So this, again, this email will be in the deck that we share with you online. And if you have any questions about it, I'd be happy to answer them or to refer you to folks at WOSIP who can tell you more about the organization and the incredible great work that they're doing. I'm going to just take a look in the chat and see if anything new has come in. I don't see anything new, and I'll take a look in Q&A. Okay, and I'm just going to look at our participants and see if any hands have been raised. And it looks like there are none. As we wind up with just 1 minute to go, Richelle, I want to thank you so much for providing us with this great information and just offer you an opportunity to wrap up and say a few words. But thank you very much for doing this for us.
Sure, thanks, Jill. It was fun. So thanks for letting me come today and talk about this. As I said, I've been really lucky to have been able to take this class at such an opportune time in our globe in our world for doing all of this. So it's been, I had no idea when I took the class that it was going to be quite so important right now. So I really appreciate the time. And I would just encourage everybody, we do have on our Vitiello website, there is an inclusive workplace culture page under free assessment, or yeah, under free assessments and under our resources. So I would encourage you to take a look there because there are some great resources. There's a quiz around your allyship journey as far as your organization goes. There's a new video that was just posted that talks about why inclusive workforce is so important, and some more resources around allyship. So take a look there if you get a chance. And like I said, I think Seth will be sharing out a lot of the resources and links that we mentioned today. So let us know if you have any questions, and don't forget to start your 10-day challenge tomorrow.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining. We appreciate it. Take care now.